And, who do you get to interview these two guys? There's only one person, and like Bob Hawke and like John Howard, he said yes instantly to my ask that he would be here today. Please welcome Ray Martin.
Thank you, gentlemen, very much. 910 people, John and Bob. You blokes have still got it, haven't you? You can still pull it in. What is it, charm or intelligence?
Great cause and great compare.
It is a great cause indeed. What is it about today? If you believe the polls, gentlemen, we have two leaders in federal politics who are on the nose. Why, more than anyone I've covered, I went to Canberra in 1965 to cover politics. More than anyone I've covered, what is it about politicians today? Is it about, do we blame the media? Is it 24-hour news? What is it that puts politicians on the nose?
Well, I think you need to put it into a wider context, Ray. I don't know whether John will agree with me, but...
Well, just try me.
I've been trying to you for a long time.
Yeah, you have, yeah.
Very tried.
But seriously, I think we are at a unique point in the world today. I believe that there hasn't been a point before the present time, since the end of the Second World War, when there hasn't been at least one outstanding political leader in the world. And in other words, I'm trying to put the Australian situation into a global context. I think you've got to ask yourself the question, why is this so? And one of the reasons, John, I think, is that I think the media in general have become much more intrusive into the personal and private lives of people in politics. And I think there are a hell of a lot of people of talent, maybe particularly more on the Conservative side of politics, who say, what the hell, why should I subject myself to this? So I think the pool of talent has dried up, and I put your question therefore into this global context. I think it's something that we should worry about, and
that's why I mentioned the media, Bob.
Yeah. Well, I think the media has become more intrusive. I mean, you're looking now on both sides. They're delving back into Julia back 17 years ago, and in return, obviously, Labor is stirring up an investigation of Julia Bishop 17 years ago. I think the people want better than this.
Bob, why are politicians, John, why are politicians on the nose?
Ray, I'd have to say something in defence of the two current leaders. We have an unusual situation. We have a dead heat. The first time we've had a genuine dead heat in Australian politics since the war years, since 1940. And see, there's a difference in politics between popularity and authority. As Bob and I both know, you can be popular one day and not so popular the next. And it happens to all of us. I mean, his ratings went up and down, mine went up and down, and that'll happen. But if you've clearly won an election and you're clearly in control of your own house, you have authority. When he was Prime Minister, he never lost authority. When I was Prime Minister, I never lost authority. Neither did Fraser or Keating. But you've got this situation here where Julia Gillard, unusually replaced an elected Prime Minister. Now, I don't want to get into all the details of that. That belongs to other discussion. But you've really got to, and because she didn't win the last election in her own right, there's a sense in the community that she doesn't have the authority of an elected Prime Minister. And I think part of the stalemate you've now got. And it's going to go on until there's an election. When there's an election, I promise you this, without trying to predict the outcome, it will be a clear-cut result. We won't get another hung parliament. And I think...
wishful thinking?
No,
is this wishful thinking?
No, I don't think it's... I think it's true. I think people will vote precise, clearly enough one way or the other. Now, I have to say that in defence in a sense of both Julia Gillard and Tony Abbott. Bob's got a point about you look around the world. I mean, I look back to the period, particularly in the 80s, and just concentrating on leaders outside of Australia at that time. You had Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, and I think also, although he was a religious leader, I thought Pope John Paul II was a great world leader, and the contribution that he made to bringing down about the downfall of the Soviet Union was terrific. So I think Bob's got something of a point on that. But I do think domestically we have got this very unusual situation, and I frankly don't blame the media. Look, they're intrusive, but they've always been intrusive. They've just got more devices with which to be intrusive these days. And I don't know how any of us, and I don't really buy the line that, you've got a problem, so you've got to put up with the media. It's one of the three great guarantors of freedom, the free media, and there's a pest, and it can aggravate you, and it aggravated me. I'm sure it aggravated Bob, and I'm sure it aggravated Paul Keating and Malcolm Fraser, but at the end of the day, it's a part of our nation, and God forbid we should ever try in any way to muzzle the press. Leave the press alone.
Bob, just picking up that worldview then, someone like Obama, are we a better place? Are we a better place in Australia and the world because Obama won that election over Mitt Romney?
Well, I was rooting for him and I predicted that he would win. Let me say, I don't think he should be overrated as a great leader. I think the things he stood for I preferred in compared with Romney, but you've got to remember he came to the presidency with very, very little experience. I mean, he became president basically on the basis of a great piece of oratory at the Democratic Convention.
But again, in bad times, tough times for him as well.
Yeah, well, he inherited a buggered-up economy from Bush, a very significantly buggered-up economy. I think some of the things he did were good and it helped. It would have been worse if it hadn't happened, if he hadn't had made those decisions. But your question, would the world have been better off, is it better off because it was him rather than Romney? I would say marginally, but I wouldn't say it's a huge gap.
John?
Oh, yeah, I think it's true that unlike Kevin Rudd, Barack Obama did inherit an economy in difficulty. But can I just say that I agree with Bob in relation to. I think Obama's election as the first black president of the United States was a magnificent thing, and it must have been wonderful if you were an African American to know that one of your own could become President of the United States. But that having occurred, that box having been ticked, he then had to deliver. And I think Obama disappointed Americans, but although tribally I would have preferred Romney to have won, and if I'd have been there I'd have voted for him, he did not excite me as a campaigner. I didn't think he was a particularly convincing politician.
Okay. Obama overnight has said that Israel has the right to defend itself against rocket attacks. With now over 100 civilians killed in Gaza, what right do the Palestinian people have?
Well, I think anybody who's attacked by rockets, as Israel, has got their right to defend. The difficulty Israel has in world opinion is because she has a superior military force, she will always inflict more damage in retaliation than she receives in attack. But that doesn't alter the moral culpability of those who rain rockets on Israel. That argument's the equivalent of saying because the Americans inflicted more damage in bombing raids over Tokyo in World War II than the Japanese did at Pearl Harbor, therefore the Americans were in the wrong. That's a very false argument. But having said that, I think both of us would argue, Bob will speak for himself, both of us would argue very, very strongly that the world does want a two-state solution. It's going to be very difficult, but it is a terrible shame that when most rational people you talk to, both on the Palestinian side and in Israel, accept that there is the bones of a solution with Gaza and the West Bank, some give and take in relation to the 1967 borders, and obviously some kind of recognition of a Palestinian presence in East Jerusalem. That's the reality on the ground if you visit the place. And I can only express the hope, prayer that out of all of this there can be renewed effort, but it's very, very difficult.
Bob, again, many of these civilians we talk about, the 100 or so have been killed, are as innocent as those on the Israeli side, aren't they? They're victims of this as much as...
Of course they are, yeah. The facts are fairly simple. You have a situation where Hamas, which is an extreme organisation basically supported by Iran and obviously supplying the rocketry, the weapons, they are sending these rockets over, and obviously Israel has the right to protect itself. But having said that, which is an indisputable truth, it's not simply a question of it all being the fault of the Palestinians. I think the Israeli government has been less than responsible to its own self-interest in the way it has encouraged extended settlements in the West Bank. This is counterproductive to a settlement, I think counterproductive to its own best interests. I think that the United States has missed a great opportunity to make a very significant move towards settling this dispute. When I was earlier in this period when Colin Powell was Secretary of State under Bush, I proposed what I called the Powell Plan for Palestine. It was based on the concept of the Marshall Plan in the post-war period, where in one of the great acts of international statesmanship, the United States poured money into Western Europe to create viable economies there, which was essential in terms of the Soviet threat. My proposition is that the United States should have and should still pour money into Palestine to make a viable economy, to create jobs, employment and hope for the Palestinian people. This is what would change the mindset of the Muslim and the Arab world. It hasn't been done, but that's the way they must go if you're going to stop this mutually unacceptable slaughter of innocent people.
As we sit here, though, in a word, do you fear a war there, given the change of dynamics after the Arab Spring?
I don't think we'll go to a situation of war, because in the end, although the concept of self-interest hasn't worked out as it should have, in my judgment, I think ultimately the Israelis would understand that all-out war, or the other side going for all-out war, would be against their own interest. Right. And in the same sense that I think it would be manifestly against the interests of Israel to bomb Iran, because I think there is nothing more certain than that would spell the death warrant of Israel. Because if they attacked Iran, there is no doubt in my mind that Iran and the forces sympathetic to them would get a nuclear device and put it into Israel.
Okay, you're saying no as well, John. So let's stay overseas for a moment, though. Paul Keating the other day suggested that your government, the Gillard government and the Rudd government had dropped the ball on Asia, especially on Indonesia. I think you described it as fatuous.
I did.
Surprising.
Yeah, well, it is. I won't put it to that, but I think you might describe that same view as that. Look, his speech is based on this absurd notion that somehow or other, in order to ingratiate ourselves to countries in Asia, to China and the like, we have to move away from the United States. I mean, I have long believed that a nation like Australia does not have to choose between her history and her geography. And our association with the United States can be kept, it can be deepened, but we can also build a close relationship with China. And he talked specifically about Indonesia. Well, I think it's fair to say when I left office, our relationship with Indonesia was very close. The warmth of President Yudhoyono, who's a wonderful, moderate Muslim leader of the largest Muslim country in the world. That's got to mean something, because we want moderate Muslim leaders. We had very close relations, despite the fact that Australia had led the Interfed intervention in East Timor, which was a severe international humiliation for Indonesia. I think you make a terrible mistake if we bring about a false choice between China and the United States. It should be the objective of Australian foreign policy to work closely with both. We should welcome the rise of China. It's good for China, it's good for the world, it's particularly good for Australia because of all the resources we have. And we don't have to lecture the Chinese about how they run their country, but we don't have to apologise for our own history or apologise for the friends we have in other parts of the world. And we live in a global world, for truism. And there's no reason why on earth, with all of our historic associations with countries like the United States and the United Kingdom and other nations in Europe, we can't have that, but at the same time build close relations with the Chinese. They respect our history. They understand why we're close to the Americans. They don't see it directed at them. That is fatuous. I dealt with the Chinese a lot. They understood the history of our alliance with the United States. It grew out of the circumstances of World War II, and they understand the circumstances of World War II only too well because of the suffering they suffered. They incurred at the hands of the Japanese.
Bob, I think you said to me earlier today that you've just done your 93rd trip to China. Was it 93?
Yeah.
So you're back and forth all the time. Do the Chinese see the 2,000 American GIs in Darwin as part of the American containment of China? They see it as an aggressive?
They're not happy about it, but I think it can be handled. I personally don't think it was necessary myself, but...
not necessarily have a base there?
Well, they would deny it's a base, it's a turning over point, but that's, just playing with words. The basic point is that, and I agree essentially with John, that if you look at our history, but then you've got to interpret that, which I will in a moment, but if you look at our history, it is a history which has shown that the Chinese understand and accept the contemporaneity of a relationship, Australia and China, and Australia and the United States. And in fact, when I was Prime Minister, I acted as a conduit for the Chinese leadership to the United States. At one specific point, I was there and they were concerned, and this was when the Cold War was still at its height, and they were concerned that the United States perhaps didn't understand that the relationship that they were having with the Soviet Union in respect of a couple of matters, a positive relationship, that this was a reflection of basically a close relationship with the Soviet, and that this was something that the United States, they thought, was worried about. And they asked me to explain to the United States leadership that this was purely a commercial decision and that they were fundamentally shared the view of the United States about the threat of the Soviet Union. So the point I'm making is that the fact of a relationship, Australia with the United States and with China, is not only possible, but can be quite positive. But we have to understand that that was in a Cold War context.
Very different.
You had the threat of an hegemonistic Soviet Union. Now, part of the problem of the current situation is you've got too many people on the right wing in the United States and to some extent here and elsewhere who are trying to equate China today with the Soviet Union of the past. This is an absurdity. By nature, the Soviet Union was an hegemonistic power dedicated to spreading its ideology, its force and influence around the world. Historically, China has not been hegemonistic. You go back 600 years when Admiral Hawke made those 7 voyages with the biggest fleet, the largest number of soldiers and sailors, went right through Asia, past India, right down the east coast of Africa. No attempt at colonisation. So to try and have this replace the Soviet Union with China as a threat is an absurdity. And what John says, right, the task of statesmanship for Australia is to develop and welcome the growing strength of China, because no country in the world, apart from China itself, has benefited more from China's growth than has Australia.
Well, John, what about Chinese investment then? Are you happy about Cubby Station being bought by Chinese and Japanese?
Look, I fully support Chinese investment. I think there's alarm in some quarters about Chinese investment.
In your party, on your side of politics?
Well, there are a few people everywhere. But look, this country has always needed foreign investment, and there's always been some alarm about it. When I first entered Parliament in 1974, people were expressing alarm about the influence of Detroit in our motor manufacturing industry. People will now go down on bended knees to have Detroit influential in our motor manufacturing industry. In the 70s and 80s, people expressed concern about Japanese investment. The Chinese investment is just part of an historic pattern. Okay, some of the companies are state-owned. That is how they do business. In the 70s and 80s, some of the Japanese companies were state-told. They weren't state-owned, but they acted together. Look, it's just part of the process. You can't expect the Chinese to be our largest export destination, and they are, and not expect in return Chinese companies to want to have equity in Australian and investment here. So
it's farms or food production doesn't matter.
No, I don't think. Well, I mean, where's the magnificently better domestic alternative ownership arrangement? I mean, the development in the Ord, where there's been a decision made in favour of a Chinese company. Well, it was obviously the best offer. I mean, it's been a dream of people for decades that we open up the north for agriculture, and if the Chinese can play a role in that, I don't think we should be alarmed. I think it's a sign of maturity that if we're not alarmed, and I think it's just part of a pattern. And when you look at the level of Chinese investment in Australia at the moment, it's quite small, and I mean, the preponderance of investment is still American, Japanese, British, and I just think it sends the wrong signal to the Chinese if we look in any way, if we are equivocal about Chinese investment in this country.
Let's go wider then, Bob, if we can, in terms of, I'm sure this room would love to hear both of your thoughts in terms of world economy. In a year's time, given the America's on the so-called fiscal edge and given Europe's problems, where do you see us? Where's Australia going to be in a year's time?
I think we'll be growing at about roughly the same order we are now. The problem is Europe. I think I have a degree of confidence that following the election in the United States, they will get perhaps not an ideal, but a modus vivendi which could see the American economy continuing to show signs of picking up. I am more pessimistic about Europe. There's a marvellous comment the other day, I don't know whether you saw it, John, but it was by the Prime Minister of Luxembourg, and he said, he was being asked about the European economic situation, he said, the trouble is we know what to do, the trouble is we do not know what to do to get re-elected after we do it. And this is going back to what I was saying, is the problem is not economic understanding, it's lack of political leadership, and you've got this half-baked situation in the United States, in Europe, where you've got the European Union, but you haven't got fiscal union.
In a word, are you gloomy or are you confident?
Well, I'm not terribly optimistic about Europe. I think it's going to take a while for them to come to their senses.
John, what do you think?
Well, my view on America is relatively the same as Bob's. I think one of the reasons why Obama won is that the signs of an American recovery were already there at the time of the election, particularly with the unemployment figures. And the other big thing that's happening in America is this extraordinary potential game changer of oil and gas out of shale. You're now getting what they call the onshoring of American manufacturing. Now, this has enormous implications, incidentally, including for Australia. The World Energy Agency has predicted that by 2020, the United States will have the same level of oil exports as Saudi Arabia. Now, if I were an American politician, I'd be grabbing that with both hands, because the holy grail of American foreign policy has got to be to liberate itself from the politics of the Middle East and to liberate itself from dependence on Middle East oil. So I am fairly optimistic about America. And the other great thing about America is that it's essentially an unregulated economy, and the animal spirits of capitalism get stirring in America more readily than anywhere else in the world. I share Bob's concern about Europe. I think the euro was flawed from the beginning. You can't have a monetary union without a fiscal union, and I do not believe that the French National Assembly will ever surrender control over spending and taxation to a Europe that they think will be dominated by by the Germans.
John, with respect, I'm tired of you two agreeing with each other. Let me change to...
Well, say something
Well,
controversial.
what about gay marriage? Where do you stand on that, John? We just had Obama change his mind. Have you changed your mind?
I haven't changed my mind on that, no. I haven't changed my mind at all. Haven't changed my mind.
Are you surprised, Bob?
No.
No.
He's not a bad bloke, but he's a real bloody conservative.
Did you hear Obama's pitch on that, simply saying he used to be like you,
Yeah,
but
look,
he changed his mind?
I did hear his pitch on that, and
Why do you object?
why do I object? Well, I object on what you might call classical conservative grounds, that one of the bedrock institutions of our society is marriage, which the great majority of Australians have always seen as between a man and a woman. It's sort of tied up with children, and I think it's one of those things that a society like ours should be very reluctant to undertake. And what, in a sense, puzzles me, or it doesn't puzzle me, but intrigues me about this debate, is that many of the groups and many of the people who are now campaigning so very strongly for gay marriage have spent the last generation or two trying to diminish the importance of marriage within our community, but suddenly something that didn't matter for a long time has now become so terribly important that they want to embrace it. I think it's sort of become a new political goal of some of the more radical progressive left groups, but then there'll be plenty of people in this room who will disagree with me. But
Are you radical progressive left?
no,
Bob?
he's not. He was accused of being a right winger on occasion.
I am very much in favour of the law being changed to enable marriage between gay people. I feel very deeply on all issues of discrimination and in this area of sexual discrimination. It just needs to be said straightforwardly. If we're born with curly hair, we can be born with this gene disposition towards homosexuality. It's not something you basically choose, it's the way you are. And if a person is that way and they want to have the rights of the institutions of our society, they should have them.
John, Joe Hawke says that workplace change, industrial change, is not a priority. Should it be?
Well, I think the present industrial relations...
Malcolm's listening, by the way.
Yeah, I think the present industrial relations laws have represented a swinging of the pendulum too far back away from what happened in the time we were in government. I think most of the changes we made when we were in government in this area were right and they were beneficial. And I guess one of the interesting tests of that is that 2 months after I left office, unemployment in Australia dipped to 3.9%, the lowest in more than 30 years, and it's also a fact that in the time we were in government, real wages steadily rose.
But would you accept part of the reason you got kicked out was the fact that the work
I
changes?
think we got kicked out for a combination of reasons. I think the main reason was we've been there for a long time and people get bored with you after a while, no matter who you are, and no matter what side of politics you're on. I think the it's time reason was the main reason we lost the election. I also think the environment played a bigger role in the defeat of my government.
You mean the physical environment?
Yeah, I think the whole environmental issue, because remember this was before the global financial crisis and you almost had a perfect storm. You had bushfires starting early, you had Al Gore's essentially fraudulent movie in many respects. It was highly fraudulent. You had that Stern review and you had, and the drought and all of these things. And I found going around the community, people were very worked up about the environmental issue. But coming back to IR, I've said before and I say it again, I think we made a mistake in the no disadvantage test removal. That was seen as a threat to penalty rates and holiday loadings. I think that was an error, but I think there are other aspects. I don't myself see any reason why we shouldn't have individual contracts subject to a strict no disadvantage test, and I also think that for small businesses the existing unfair dismissal regime is unreasonable. You have to have worked in a small business to truly understand that if you've got a small outfit and you've really got, for the sake of the peace and the harmony and the success, you might have to let one person go. You should be able to do that without having to pay go-away money that might consume all the profit that you've got.
Now, Bob, I'm sure you don't agree. I know you don't agree on that. But can I ask, is Tony Abbott the best thing going for the Labor Party right now?
Well, I hope they don't swap him. Sorry, Malcolm. No, I haven't come here with the intention of attacking the other side of politics, but I think objectively speaking, it is the case, and all the polls certainly show it, that Tony is not a plus for the Conservative forces in this country. As distinct from a situation, say, roughly 3 months ago, where I wouldn't have considered a bet on Labor winning the next federal election. We're moving towards a situation where, with just a reasonable amount of odds, I would think it's an intelligent proposition to think about it. And you ask yourself, why? Why has this happened? And you've got to have, as one of the reasons, one of the answers to your question, why has that happened? The undeniable evidence of all the polls of an increasing rejection of Tony. So the answer to your question has got to be that he's one of the best things going for us. I think you've got to be fair to Julia Gillard. I think, and John mentioned earlier, the historically unusual circumstances in which they're both operating now in a hung parliament imposes very, very severe constraints on political leadership. But if you look at the legislative achievement record in these very difficult circumstances, it's quite significant. You go back over all that she's done. You may not agree with everything, but it's been nevertheless a significant record, and she has shown guts. Whatever else you may say about Julia, and there's obviously some area of criticisms that are available, she has shown enormous guts and determination, and I think people are starting to respond to that.
All right, I noticed you're smiling, John, but I also noticed you talked to Malcolm Turnbull a little earlier.
He was one of my cabinet ministers.
Oh, no.
He's a good friend of mine.
On Q&A last night, the suggestion was that if Malcolm Turnbull and Kevin Rudd got together, they'd win the election. Yeah.
Well, that's the sort of suggestion you expect to be made on Q&A. Of course. What else? I mean, tell me something that would surprise me, please. Look, can I haven't come along here to criticise anybody in the Labor Party either, but can I just say a couple of things in defence of Tony? In my opinion, what Tony Abbott did at the last election was extraordinary. I mean, he almost pulled off something that's only happened once in our history, and that's the defeat of a first-term government. That first-term government of Jim Scullins was defeated in the depths of the Great Depression, and after a defection from the Labor Party of Joe Lyons and a few other people who joined the opposition and formed a new party. Now, without any of that, Abbott did very well, and it's my view, and I say this in full knowledge of different opinions other people in the room may hold, that if Abbott had not become the leader of the party before the last election, Rudd would never have been thrown out by the Labor Party, and Rudd would have won the last election with a majority in his own right. Instead of now having a situation where you've got Julia Gillard as Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd would still be the Prime Minister of Australia, because remember the sequence of events. Rudd was spooked by Abbott on climate change. His poll ratings dropped. His own party was spooked by that, and they used that as a pretext to get rid of him. Now, in my opinion, if our policy had not changed on climate change, those chain of events would not have occurred. Look, I think Tony Abbott, and I speak of somebody who sat around a cabinet table with him for 8 years, I think he'll make an excellent Prime Minister. I still think he'll win, but it's not a foregone conclusion. Those things never are. The Liberal Party would have thought in 1992 that it was a foregone conclusion that Keating was going to be defeated. I mean, you can never tell in politics. A lot of people, didn't think, in the Labor Party, didn't think Bob would make it, but he did, and he won the most successful Labor leader in history. A lot of people didn't think I'd come back, me included. And, and I did. I mean, politics is full of surprises, but I think what Tony Abbott did at the last election was extraordinary and against all predictions, and he has a special place in the Liberal pantheon as a consequence of that.
All right, the last question on the election.
Yeah, just let me make a quick response to that. It's hard to argue about what you say about his achievement in the last election, but it's irrelevant. I mean, it doesn't enter into the thinking of one single voter out there in electorate land in terms of the election coming up. That's history. It's not doing any good at all. It's other factors that people are taking into account of making their judgment about it.
Doug Cameron says that Western Sydney, the 10 seats, that's the black hole for Labor. First up, do you agree? And John, do you take credit for that?
Well,
do you agree?
I would say there are a number of potential black holes. I mean, you'd obviously have to say Queensland.
Yep. And WA.
And WA. But so I would say that area of Sydney is one of the problems. But in terms of the things I've said before, I think the pendulum is swinging, and by the time of the election, if it goes its full term, which I think it will, getting on towards the end of next year, and you have a situation where Australia continues to be virtually the strongest, one of the strongest economies in the developed world, and the difficulties I think that the opposition is going to have in establishing the fiscal responsibility of what they're saying, I would think that all those factors are going to be in the minds of electors everywhere around Australia, including in these areas of black hole. And so I'm saying that the broad sweep of political change that's, I think, happening now will not say, oh, that's not going to be effective in Western Sydney, it's not going to be effective in Queensland. It will be effective all over.
Bob, that's same question. John, the same question. Do you take credit?
No, I think there's essential consistency, as Bob says, about community attitudes around the country. But I mean, in Western Sydney, one of the, in fact, probably the greatest policy failure of this government of all, the gratuitous dismantling of the successful border protection policy, does play very heavily, and I think that is a factor. Whether I take credit or somebody, in a sense, is immaterial, but I think it is a factor. I don't think, and I'm sorry to lapse into partisanship, I don't think when the people go to the election next year, which it will be, I don't think their judgment will be that the Labor Party is a superior economic manager. I think the feeling of the Australian community is that Mr Rudd inherited an economy humming with prosperity, and sure, he was hit by a global financial crisis, and I accept that, but there was a lot of money wasted in response to that, a lot of errors made, and if it hadn't have been for the strength of the economy he inherited, plus China as an export destination, our economy would not be as strong as it is. And I agree with Bob that for those reasons, those two reasons in particular, as you compare us with other economies, we are better off, but I don't think a lot of people are going to give much credit to the current government for that.
All right, almost out of time, people do have to go, but apart from yourselves, who has been the greatest Australian Prime Minister?
John Curtin.
John Curtin, why, Bob?
Because he overcame a lot of personal problems. The Conservatives were in power at the time of the greatest threat to Australia's very existence, and they proved incapable of meeting the challenge of war and organising the resources of Australia, so much so that the two independents, Coles and Wilson, crossed the floor and gave the responsibility of saving Australia to Labor under the leadership of John Curtin. He rose magnificently to the challenge. Not only did he do that and turn and develop the relationship with America as part of that process, organised the resources of Australia, encouraged women into the workforce, all those things he did under tremendous leadership. But the thing that is not often enough stressed is that while he was doing that, he had a vision. He didn't want to just see a pre-war Australia restored. He wanted to see a new Australia. So in the darkest days of war, he created the Department of Post-War Reconstruction under the leadership of one of the finest minds in the history of Australian bureaucracy, Nugget Coombs, and they planned there for a new, greater, stronger, better Australia. And one of the greatest elements of that, one of the greatest decisions that ever been made by any government under his leadership was the decision to have this massive post-war immigration policy, which strengthened this country economically, enriched it culturally. And this all happened under the leadership of John Curtin.
Okay, John, I know you're writing a book about Bob Menzies, so I know who you're going to say.
Yeah, well, undeniably, Menzies is the greatest Prime Minister, undeniably. I think Menzies...
I deny it.
Yeah, all right. I think... Look,
why did they throw him out?
Why did they throw him out? Well,
your mob threw him out.
Your mob threw you out. I mean,
I know.
No, well, then why? I mean, they should... And then that happens in democracy, Bob. It does happen in democracy. Yeah. Can I just say about Menzies that Menzies, you know, I pay tribute, incidentally, to the Labor Party for starting post-war migration. It's an undeniable fact. You know, give Menzies credit for the fact that the post-war prosperity of this country was really built in those early 1950s. If the Labor Party had succeeded with bank nationalisation, which was the policy of the Labor Party immediately after the war, the whole structure of the post-war Australian economy would be different. Can you envisage, I know a lot of people hate banks, but can you envisage what this country's industry would have been like in the 1950s if we'd have had no private trading banks, if we'd have just had the Commonwealth Bank? Well, that was the policy of the Labor Party. Menzies' longevity, his capacity to see a long view about Australia, he actually did more to prepare us for war than with respect Bob has given him credit for, but no, it's too long a thing to debate, Bob. I can hear you rumbling a bit on that, but...
He's having a heart attack at the moment.
No, but I think he did a lot more than he's given credit for, but the other great thing he achieved in politics is that he came back. People wrote Menzies off. After he was pushed out, he said he'd go away and bleed a while. Well, he didn't bleed for long. He set about forming the Liberal Party of Australia, bringing together all the anti-socialist forces, which was no mean feat at the time. And then he went on and...
Had Bob Santa Maria to help him.
Yeah, well, he did. That's right. Well, the Bob Santa Maria was a function of Everett's insanity after the 1954 election. I mean.
All right, let me ask you both. In a word, Bob, your greatest single achievement in politics? In a word.
Well, I think bringing Australia together again. This country was a very riven country when I came to office in '83, and I promised that the first thing would be reconciliation, then recovery and reconstruction. The summit of April '83, where I got a unanimous communique, except for Joe, out of all those representatives of big business, small business, the trade unions, the states, local government, the churches, welfare organisers, unanimous communique recognising the challenges confronting the country and agreeing, giving us a mandate to go ahead with basic economic reform. I think that was essentially the foundation of all that we were able to do.
Okay. And John?
Oh, leaving the country infinitely more prosperous and stronger and prouder than what it was when I became Prime Minister in '96. I mean, that's overall. I have particular pride in two or three things: the liberation of East Timor, the national gun control laws, and the way in which we were simultaneously able to build an even deeper relationship with the Americans, but also a close relationship with China. I mean, the symbolism of the 23rd of October, George W. Bush addresses a joint sitting of Parliament, the leader of the strongest democracy in the world, and the next day President Hu Jintao gives an address to the same joint sitting of the same Parliament, speaks volumes for the balance we achieved. And that was very important to the rest of the world. They saw in us a mature Western country able to engage very deeply with the most powerful nation in Asia. Now, that was a pretty significant thing.
All right, we thank you both for what you've done in politics and coming here today. I know you get asked to appear every day of the week, 3 or 4 times every day. So for you to pick Lifeline today and come and open up before us is fantastic. Thank you for your time, both of you. John Howard, Bob Hawke. Thanks, mate. Very much. Thanks, mate. Very much indeed.
I've got to say, John.